Okay, we're live. Welcome everyone to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. My name is Adam Sturman. I'm a producer and webmaster here with Promethean Action. I do a little bit of everything, edit the newsletters, edit the videos. Thank you very much for joining us. Before we begin here, let us know where you are in the chat. If you're in the United States, let us know what state you're in. If you're watching from some other country, let us know what your country you're watching from in the chat. I'm joined today with Susan Kokinda and Barbara Boyd. Welcome, Susan. Barbara Boyd is also the treasurer of our Political Action Committee, because we actually have two organizations. We have Promethean Action and Promethean PAC. So Barbara is the treasurer of Promethean PAC. So let's see here. Thank you, Paul. Welcome. Curtis Miller, great update yesterday, Susan. Hi from Macedonia. Welcome. Kansas City, sunny Florida, Utah, Illinois, Florida, Colorado, Ohio, Rockwell, Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, Alaska. Yes, we have a lot of support in Alaska. St. George, Utah. Thank you, X.com viewers. Thank you for tuning in. We're primarily broadcasting on YouTube, but I also have somebody watching the chat on X.com. So thank you for tuning in to X.com. Okay, we had so much going on in the world this week. I think if I could rename the title of the show, it would be "The Next War is Probably Ukraine If We Can Stop It in Time." This is a very big issue that everyone is talking about. This whole thing with Trump supplying Tomahawk cruise missiles and the intelligence and the know-how to be able to use and target these systems. That's building up very quickly. At the same time, as people are noting, especially on X.com, Obama is in London right now. So that's a developing story. I don't know if Susan or I think we just found out about that this morning, but it's definitely something we're keeping an eye on. Another thing that's coming up again is clearly this trade war with China. Just a few days ago, Donald Trump kind of admitted that, yes, it does appear like we are in somewhat of a trade war with China. There's 100% tariffs on, I think, almost everything in China, coming out of China right now. And I think he's threatening to raise it to 500%. But, paradoxically, as Donald Trump usually is, he said in this Truth Social, I can pull up the truth, but I think a lot of people saw it. He said, don't worry about Xi Jinping and the negotiations. It's going to be okay. So we have a lot of tension going on. And so I'd like to open it up to Barbara and Susan to see if they have any opening statements before we begin. We're going to be beginning today with people's questions on the Middle East peace negotiations. But so anything to say before we begin here?
I'll just say something which I hope will frame people's thinking for the entire show. And that is the question of intention. Too many people over the years have sort of fallen into what we here call the connecto way of looking at the world. The knee bone is connected to the thigh bone, and therefore so on and so forth. In the globalist world, that kind of works. That is, they have their institutions, they have their individuals, they have their apparatus, they deploy them. You can pull the string on all of those things. And put together maybe a credible view of what is going on in the world. But when you have a true leader like Donald Trump, who operates not from the standpoint of being caught in living in the matrix, but who actually wants to change the world, which this man is clearly doing, which is why the elites are terrified of him. The important question is intention. What is his intention? His intention is exactly what he said: peace and economic development, restoring the primacy of sovereign nations to the world over the globalists, over their institutions, over their little created ideologies. And you can't understand anything he is doing, and you can't understand the enormous impact he's having on the world unless you start from the fact that he is operating from the standpoint of intention. So I just want to leave it at that, because I think that's going to help frame a lot of the discussion that comes.
Thank you very much, Susan. So right before we begin, please hit the like button, especially if you're on YouTube. We have about 560 people currently watching on YouTube. Please hit the like button because that increases our distribution to the YouTube algorithm, to the platform as a whole. Okay, so the first set of questions is going to be on the peace negotiations, which was one of our number one questions this week. Okay, sorry, let me pull it up here. Given that Donald Trump is riding a wave of admiration for his successful Middle East peace negotiations, doesn't that leave him vulnerable? Sabotaging the new peace deal with new violence would easily flip the admiration to derision. Hamas readily handed over their only cards in the game, which seems odd. Maybe another player offered them a very different deal behind the scenes. Does Trump need to be careful, or would he have already factored this in? Thank you, Eric. And I'm going to take the next one here. I have no confidence in the peace process in the Middle East. I don't think Israel or Hamas is going to keep their word. Let's hope the coalition can keep this peace together. What do you think? Thank you, Peter. Does anyone think Benjamin Netanyahu, real name Benzion Milikowski, is really going to stop warring with Iran or his Mideast neighbors? Thank you, JD. And yes, also another fact that people might not know about Benjamin Netanyahu, he was actually born in the United States. He went to Cheltenham High, right on the edge of Philadelphia. So he's actually an American. And four, please tell me again how Trump's involvement as a peacemaker around the world helps and benefits America. What is why? Thank you, Pauline. She's from Seattle. She's a longtime supporter. So let's get an update on what you ladies think on the ongoing Mideast peace negotiations and the role Donald Trump plays in that, and how this affects how this plays back into the United States.
Well, I'll start since it was the focus of my Wednesday update. And it gets back to what I said initially. Adam, could you share the screen? I think this picture is one of those pictures that tells a million words. Please look at the expression on the British Prime Minister's face right here. Now, admittedly, he always looks like he's sucking on a lemon, but I think this picture really does capture it. And if you look at the way Trump orchestrated this Sharm el-Sheikh summit, I mean, think about it. The Europeans had nothing to do with this. The Europeans, and in particular the British, who have been the architects of perpetual war in the Mideast for over a century, had nothing to do with these negotiations. They had to scramble. They had to jump on their planes to get to Sharm el-Sheikh to be the background for Donald Trump's yes, thank you, Barnes Homestead. He does look constipated. Starmer, that is. So I want people to sort of have this image in their head. What Trump has done is throw out the geopolitical rule book. He does not accept their terms in terms of the nature of this conflict. Their terms are, you've got a bunch of people in Israel who hate the Palestinians and the Muslims. You have a bunch of people in Palestine and the Muslims who are going to hate the Jews in Israel forever. And this is going to go on forever. And somehow you're going to try and negotiate that within that framework. Well, everybody else tried that and everybody else failed. Trump has done something completely different, and especially by establishing strong relations with other Muslim nations, both in the region, Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf states. Obviously, he's looking at Qatar as a major force in solving this, but also outside the region, like Pakistan and Indonesia. He's breaking the controlled environment by bringing these forces in to put the necessary pressure on the British radical Islamic assets. And then, as I developed in my update yesterday, he did the same thing with Israel by making himself more popular than Netanyahu, which everybody could see when Steve Witkoff was addressing the crowd last weekend on Hostage Square. Netanyahu was booed and Trump was wildly cheered. By making himself more powerful than Netanyahu inside Israel, it's given more leverage to the sane forces in Israel, so that Netanyahu is now under more pressure from the peace faction, or at least the peace faction has more leverage than it did before, where previously Netanyahu was tacking constantly toward the right-wing settlers movement, which is even crazier than Netanyahu, people should know. Trump backup singers. Thank you, Karen. I love that. But that's why he was able to bring this about. And the other thing that I stressed in my update is, as you saw Trump on Air Force One with what seems to be a British reporter or somebody else with a very good British accent, Trump is not going to step in on the landmine of trying to settle whether it's going to be a one-state or two-state solution right now. You can't do that right now. You have to rebuild Gaza. You have to create a zone of actual peace, of actual prosperity before you can get peace. Now, are the British, are the globalists going to try and blow this up? Of course they are. Adam mentioned at the beginning that Obama's in London. We don't have a picture of that yet. We'll be looking at it. I'm sure if there's anything actionable to be said, Barbara will bring it up on Saturday, so stay tuned. But Trump is operating from a different strategic domain. And again, it gets back to what I said before. His intention is actual peace. His intention is to dismantle the globalist apparatus. His intention is to create a world where sovereign nations can flourish and work with each other despite whatever their particular conflicts may be. So, yeah, obviously, we would be foolish to think that the enemy does not have fallback options in the Mideast. But I think people also have to be extremely conscious and proud of the fact that you have a president of the United States who thinks on a completely different plane from these people. So I'll say that. I imagine Barbara has a few things she'd like to add.
Well, in terms of what is our interest, the world is a very destabilized place to be doing business at this point. Ever since World War II and the end of it, we got snookered in to taking over all the British bases throughout the entire world at enormous expense to the American population. And we executed a strategy which was based on geopolitical maxims from the British Empire rather than our own self-interest. It is in our self-interest not to have wars blowing up the world's economy at a point where the world's economy is very, very fragile. And you've got to have peace, because that allows us to put our defense budget into reality. That's why Trump is pushing these other guys so hard and saying, you guys have to be nation states, these crazy globalist alliances, which have sucked our nation dry, quite frankly, we're not going to tolerate anymore. So that's our interest, reducing the military scope of what we're covering in the world, saving us tons of money, creating a basis for countries to actually talk to one another about what the terms of trade are going to be, as opposed, as Trump said, to us being ripped off at every turn because we assumed this role of the world's policeman. And, if you can actually bring peace to these two, as Trump put it most bluntly, there's also just a fundamental moral issue here. He says, above all else, I want to stop the killing. That's my main intention. We need to stop the killing of people in the millions in these kind of endless wars, which go nowhere except an ongoing spiral of death.
Thank you, Barbara. So we just got a super chat question that I'm going to take next. But just as a reminder, if you're just tuning in, please give this video a like. It helps us reach more people on YouTube. So the super chat here from Jonathan. Trump and Putin are supposed to have a phone call today ahead of Zelensky coming to the White House. What do you ladies expect to happen?
I can't predict what President Trump is going to do. That's exactly how he negotiates, by surprise and never being able to be profiled into a position. And clearly, people have been trying to put him in one or another of their chosen pathways about what's going on in Ukraine for the most recent period. So I expect that what Trump actually is talking about, in behind the scenes, is very, very different than what you're seeing publicly. Kirill Dmitriev has a post today saying the dialogue continues. And that's what the Russians have continuously emphasized. We are having an overall dialogue with Russia about the security structure among nuclear powers for the world in the 21st century. And much of the discussion isn't even about Ukraine. It's about the Arctic and developing the Arctic. It's about all sorts of other topics. So I don't know what he's going to do. He's floated the idea, which is kind of Trump negotiating tactics 101, that he's going to bring up the Tomahawks. Well, what happens with the Tomahawks? I think in part it's illusory. I don't think that, as Putin said, we'll just develop our defenses better. And what you're seeing in this war day by day is surprise after surprise after surprise as to new technologies. Tomahawks, how do Tomahawks line up against the glide bomb, which Russia has just perfected, according to RT this morning. So what he's trying to do is get a peace agreement. The Europeans and Zelensky have stood in the way of that. That much we can say for sure. But Russia also wants to accomplish its objectives in the war. If you lost as many people as President Trump being fed an analysis by the CIA, which I don't think is necessarily true, but if you lost 1 million people in a war that had specified objectives and you hadn't actually met those objectives at all, you basically said, okay, the United States is telling us to cool it, we're going to do that. You're going to have a lot of opposition in Russia itself, which is the way these things generally work as a dynamic in warfare. So that's how I'd answer the question.
Thank you. Any comments, Susan?
Well, I just say I think it's important. If you watch Trump on Air Force One, I think it was coming back from the Mideast, when the question of Tomahawks was raised, maybe it was on the way there, but he made clear, well, I guess I'm going to have to talk to Putin first. So he's talking to Putin before Zelensky shows up. I don't think people should miss, that chain of events.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Jonathan, for your question. The next question here I'm going to take is regarding a mini emergency yesterday. For a few minutes there, I think everyone was a little bit freaked out about Hegseth, if you're following the news up to the second. So thank you, Carrie, for this question. Regarding Pete Hegseth's mid-flight emergency, the C-32 was parked in Belgium while Pete was attending a NATO conference, and shortly after leaving Belgium had an emergency over the Pacific, which turned out to be a cracked windshield, after they landed safely at RAF Mendenhall. First, it was President Trump's helicopter, and now Hegseth's plane. Trump's had a problem with the helicopter just a week or two ago. All simple stuff. While crafts are on the ground, both in Britain, is the high table in Britain trying to take them out? Thank you, Carrie, for your question.
Well, the high table in Britain is trying to take them out. Whether or not these two incidents are a result of that, I don't really know. Basically, what tends to happen with professional assassins is that they don't miss. The issue here is this kind of like a warning shot, but it clearly, or is it simply that, maintenance on old helicopters and on planes from the Defense Department isn't necessarily up to snuff, given the entire time we've had Biden and Obama in office. So that's how I'd answer your question.
Susan, any comment?
No.
Okay. Okay. So I want to take a quick super chat here from Melody, who's a longtime supporter on our live shows here. Thank you, Melody, for tuning in. Trump seems to be against the BRICS. I was under the impression, maybe mistake, that BRICS was a way to circumvent the globalist world banks. I am not schooled on world financial matters. So yes, that was the line, that the BRICS was supposed to be this new financial arrangement to to be a replacement to the US dollar and the US economic influence over the world. So I open this to Barbara and Susan, what is Trump's relationship to the BRICS currently?
Well, I think what you said, Adam, is right. It was packaged, it was sold in this way. People should remember that the first idea of the BRICS was actually floated by somebody from Goldman Sachs. So that should make you scratch your head a little bit in terms of this. The fundamental problem with it is that you can't challenge the global financial system without the United States. So the idea that you're going to challenge the existing system with some combination of countries that don't actually have the power to do it is just a fantasy. And I think the second point, and I think Trump understands that, and frankly, I think Putin and Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi understand that as well. Putin certainly has said, we're not interested in coming up with an alternative to the US dollar. The second fallacy of the BRICS is most of the nations involved have continued to embrace the green ideology. So, forget about being schooled on world financial affairs. The substance of economics is, are you pursuing the policies that will actually allow your physical economy to grow so you can uplift your population and your population can grow? Well, you can't do that with green policies. So it's a fantasy that you're going to create some kind of alternate system, which number one, does not include the United States. And number two, many of the countries still officially embrace the green ideology. I think Trump understands this. I don't think he frankly pays much attention to it. And I think what he's busy doing is building bilateral relations with each of these countries, Russia, China, India, and all of the other countries that he's engaged with economically on bilateral. And that's how he thinks about the world. He doesn't like multinational or multilateral institutions. He goes country to country.
Barbara?
I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay. So if you're just tuning in, welcome. This is Promethean Action's live question and answer show. We do this show every Thursday here on YouTube. We've been broadcasting to YouTube and x.com. The questions that you're seeing come mostly from our newsletter subscribers. We do a daily email newsletter. If you'd like to get our newsletter, that I put the link to ask a question in the email newsletters a few times a week. So if you'd like to stay in contact with us outside of YouTube's control, you can get our free newsletter. The link is in the description. You can go to prom.ac or search the web for Promethean Action. We're about to hit 30,000 email newsletter subs. So why don't you join us and help us reach 30,000 email newsletter subscribers? That would be an awesome milestone for us. And you'll be able to get your question in the queue. We follow the questions coming in, and they help figure out what topics we're going to cover in the shows. So get our free newsletter, and please like this video if you're just tuning in. Okay, so I'm going to take another question here regarding the UK, since we have so much support from British colonial countries like Australia, UK. We get tons of support from Canada. 2 weeks ago, after President Trump's visit to the United States, Trump said in a presser that he and King Charles are friends and have been for quite some time. This seems contradictory to your narrative regarding the royals being part of the international conspiracy. Can you please elaborate? Thank you, Rick. We get this question a lot, but I think it's important that we keep answering it. So I open the floor to Barbara and Susan.
Well, Trump is a deal maker, and he knows that you don't make deals with people by sticking your finger in their eye. That, you know, honey gets a hell of a lot more than basically slamming people. Trump has a personal, i.e. family, relationship to the royals in the sense that his mother really admired Elizabeth and really admired the royals. Does that mean that he's for what the activities of the royals have been, i.e. the green ideology, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, Dope Incorporated, all of the things which we know they've been involved in? No, in his view, that's a side issue versus what you can do when you're actually trying to move somebody and change them into a different reality. And I think that kind of explains what a lot of people get hung up on it, because they expect, if Trump knows all of the stuff in terms of what the Brits have done to him, he would be very hostile to them. But he's not. He's not, because you keep your enemies close if you're a good deal maker. And that's how I'd answer your question.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, quick super chat question here. From DG, thank you for your support. Love your cat profile picture. Just bought the book, How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. We'll read it this week. Thanks for the advice. DG, we're very welcome to have you. And hopefully we're going to start having some guests on the show. Maybe we should try and bring Richard Poe on our show one day, and he can give us a little history lesson about what he's discovered. Aren't you in contact with him, Barbara? Aren't we in contact with him at all? Microphone. Hold on.
Yeah, in a kind of distant way. I mean, and we go back and forth on his posts on X and YouTube. And you know, I've been meaning to, and will very shortly, as soon as we can set up to interview him on a show of ours. Yeah,
I think we really should, especially since, from what I understand, Barbara, you said he did use some of our previous research from decades past and did his own research on top of it.
Yeah, he took a very interesting presentation, which Lyndon LaRouche had actually choreographed, called Palmerston's Zoo. And what that was a description of how Lord Palmerston set up all of these cults of belief cults or phony religions, all designed to be, imposed on various nation states. Because if you can start religious warfare, why do you need any kind of counterinsurgency doctrine at all? You've got people embroiled, and they'll go at it just as humans have for centuries. So we did that. Richard Poe picked up on it. He thought this was ludicrous, what we were saying. How could it be that the Queen and all of these, people in the city of London actually were involved in the activities which our Palmerston Zoo presentation said they were? And then he came back and he said, you know what, I looked into it because it really bothered me, and it turns out they were right. So that's really the center of that book, and he uses a lot of things which were published by Executive Intelligence Review and LaRouche PAC in the past, to come up with his actual research in the book. But he goes beyond that and does independent research to actually pin down a lot of facts which we didn't have. So I also have to, say a little disclaimer at this point. We have nothing to do with Helga Zepp LaRouche, Mr. LaRouche's widow. or any of the entities associated with it.
Thank you, Barbara. And somebody just asked Palmerston what the production was called, the Palmerston Zoo. So it's called the Palmerston Zoo. That was a production we did in the late 80s. When was that? In the 80s or 90s? Early 90s?
1994 to be exact. Right
Yeah,
after
okay.
Mr. LaRouche came out of prison, he wanted to do that.
So the production was called the Palmerston Zoo. Okay, another quick super chat here from Paul Cahill. Does the worldwide fractional reserve bank system represent artificial debt designed to keep us all enslaved by the artificial interest, the rate of which is controlled by the banksters? How can we close this system down? Just my own personal thoughts. I don't think the problem necessarily is the use of fractional reserve banking per se. I think the problem lies more on the credit side of the issue and how national governments actually fund their own credit systems. But I'd like Barbara and Susan to maybe comment on this.
Yeah, well, that's essentially the gist of it. I mean, the issue is not the technicalities of a financial system. The issue is, again, going to come back to this theme, what's its intention? The intention of central banking is to create institutions and functions that can be used to loot the physical economy like a parasite in order to feed the financial power of a global elite. The purpose of national banking is to ensure that the credit is available for real physical economic growth of a nation. And that was the battle between our national banking system, established by Alexander Hamilton, reestablished by Abraham Lincoln, and we really haven't had one since then, and what ultimately became the Federal Reserve and the central banking system. So again, it's not in the technicalities of how you do things. Frankly, those technicalities have probably gotten a whole lot more complicated in the 21st century. But what is the purpose? And you have two entirely different purposes when it comes to central banking, which is an appendage of an imperial system, and national banking, which is a tool that should be, and seldom is, used by sovereign governments to create conditions where their economy can grow and their people can prosper.
Barbara, anything?
Well, the problem arises when you have money floating around in great big bubbles and it's not attached to anything in reality. As President Trump keeps emphasizing, we stopped building things. All right. And the reason why money, after all, is simply a way of exchange for value that you're getting back that you just paid for. How many people understand that manufacturing left this country starting in 1971? And with it went most of the working class and a great deal of the middle class, who were then subject to what was called the knowledge economy, whatever that was supposed to be. So the problem is not in the monetary side of things. The problem is in the actual real goods side of things. Russia right now, for example, the economists are trying to put sanctions on Russia on the theory that the primary way that Russia is prospering at this point is through sales of its oil and gas. Well, as RT put it this morning, Russia is the only country now building, mini nuclear plants. Already a design is in process and they're building them out. They're going for control of the next technology, which actually increases the productivity of any population. And that's where you get into all these problems, because people think, oh, we'll take them out of the SWIFT system and they'll be so upset. No, they just went around it, made deals with China and India, and that's in terms of real goods. It's not in terms of the monetary side of the equation. And the sooner people get that kind of idea out of their mind and focus on what do we need to produce, make yourself a list of all the things which are essential to human life and look at how much of it we're actually producing in the United States at this point, you'd be shocked. And that's why Trump is so important in terms of actually bringing manufacturing and high energy sourcing of everything on the economic platform back into existence.
I just want to read one comment from the chat from Elon Musk. If you don't make stuff, there is no stuff. In other words, production is primary.
Yep. Same thing with the service economy. If you're not producing things, there's really nothing to service. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Karen. Thank you very much for the super chat. We don't have corporate sponsors. We're funded primarily from our readers and our viewers. So thank you very much. And a quick shout out, if you've been enjoying our broadcast, I see we have about 1,400 live viewers and only 800 likes. If I can get the other about 600 people to give us a like, that would help us catch a wider distribution on YouTube. Okay, so I'm going to continue here. Let me get rid of this here. Okay, I'm going to continue here with the questions from our newsletter. What do you mean when you say that the empire loots countries during the wars they cause? How have they looted Africa, for example? Thank you very much, Vanya, for your question.
Well, I'll take a stab at that. Africa has a vast supply of raw materials in every category which is needed for modern life. And, I always like to show people a map as of like 10 years ago of Africa, in which you see that all of the transportation grids point outwards to transport to Europe or to transport elsewhere. They're not linked up within Africa itself. That, I think, is a pretty good example of what we're talking about here. Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes Trust and all of the ideas that came about through the Roundtable movement in Britain came out of the fact that the British were able to actually loot, South Africa most prominently, while setting them up for complete internal strife. As a friend of mine used to say, if you want to feel the sting of the British Empire, just be a third world country and ask for nuclear power as your energy source. You'll probably get shot, because that's key to the way that they actually think about things. Most certainly, if you think about the recent history of Russia, after the fall of the wall, what you see is a looting operation gone completely wild. What happened was that the British came in, along with certain people like Jeffrey Sachs and the Harvard boys, and they said, what you've got to do immediately is sell off all those state assets. And they did indeed do that through completely phony auctions, in which the City of London and George Soros were the actual participants in taking up all of what had been developed in Russia by the Soviet Union. That all happened during the Clinton administration. It was horrible, and Russia basically collapsed because of exactly those things. And if you're asking why Russians may be a little pissed off at the British and the United States at this point, you got to go back to that and actually understand that the country was looted to the bone and had to be completely reconstructed after the fall of the wall. So that's very concrete examples of what we're talking about.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I'm sorry. Please, Susan.
I was just going to say, and I think it's important to take it back to something we've referenced often, which is the exchange between Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill at the Casablanca summit at the end of World War II, where Roosevelt said to Churchill, Winston, we're not fighting this war to reestablish British 18th century methods. And Churchill blustered, "What do you mean by that?" And Roosevelt said, "Anything that takes more out of a country than it puts into it." I mean, that's sort of obvious, right? But that is the definition of imperialism. And what Roosevelt intended to do was to try and reconfigure American war production into capital goods exports that could go to these countries in Africa and other colonies. He wanted them decolonized, which in the case of Africa didn't happen until the 1960s. But Roosevelt's intention is these countries would be decolonized. We would be able to use our awesome industrial machine to export capital goods to these countries so they could actually develop. Now, Roosevelt died, and that did not happen. And again, most of these African countries remained colonies, for God's sake. Colonies in the second half of the 20th century of the British and the Dutch Empire. At a certain point, the British knew they were going to have to decolonize. So in the early 1960s, and I want to give a shout out to Jen, who put this in the chat, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and Prince Philip, the then consort of then Queen Elizabeth, founded the World Wildlife Fund, which had as a major target Africa. So they locked up huge amounts of lands by putting them in wildlife reserves. So these countries did not have the ability to develop. And in the meantime, as Barbara said, the colonial masters, now simply in the form of the City of London, Wall Street, multinational corporations, controlled the mining and just, shipped everything out of these countries, leaving them in incredible backwardness. There is no reason Africa did not develop in the same way other nations have developed. They were kept backward deliberately by the British Empire.
Barbara, just quick clarification here. When you say Jeffrey Sachs, are you speaking of Professor Sachs? I believe he is a professor, right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, associated with something everybody calls the Harvard boys, in terms of their horrible policies after the wall fell.
Thank you. Okay, quick update from a coworker here. Trump just, hold on a moment here. Remove, add. Okay, this is just released 11:21. So this is 21 minutes ago. I am speaking to President Putin now. The conversation is ongoing, a lengthy one, and I will report the contents, as will President Putin, at its conclusion. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So Barbara and Susan, what are your first thoughts when you read this? Because like I said, this came out as we were doing the show.
I think they're going to surprise us with something. And I hope the surprise is we've actually come much closer to solving the problem of this war.
Yes, I believe that it's very much true. Donald Trump takes one stance in public. He takes a very hard stance. But when it comes to the person-to-person negotiation, he's open to actual negotiation. So just so that everyone knows, this just came out as we're doing this show. Okay, quick recap here. If you're tuning in, this is Promethean Actions live question and answer show. We do this every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. If you've been watching and enjoying this content, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. We do 3 political updates a week, one on Monday, one on Wednesday, and one on Saturday. Plus, we do this live show every week. If you get our email newsletter, the link is in the description. We'll send you email updates. It's a daily email newsletter. There's so much to cover. So consider getting our newsletter, subscribe, don't miss our updates on YouTube, and please give this video a like. It increases our reach on YouTube. Okay, so let me just check here. So we got an interesting super chat, actually from an idea that I thought was very interesting when he said it. So I'm just going to pull it up. Rhetoric by Eric. Thank you for this comment. Credit is monetary time travel, moving future money backwards to the present. yes, I would agree, through the credit mechanism. You can't erode future economics forever. Eventually, it's a black hole. So on first thought, yes, this is why I think credit and physical production of your nation, also not physical, when I say physical production, I also mean agriculture, so food and goods. Credit must be tied to your physical economy. So I'd like to open this up to Barbara and Susan.
Well, I would reference something that Lyndon LaRouche pointed out was a bit of a revelation to me. Think about where the base of the word credit comes from. It comes from the Latin word credere, which means to believe. So sort of embedded in it, is this idea, not of, in a sense, tangible, but I would say taking something that you want to have happen. You want to build a plant. You want to expand a facility or something. It doesn't yet exist. You have to provide it credit to actually create something new. Now, the question always is, are you properly deploying your credit? But it is this future question. I mean, it's a very interesting concept. But then the question is, are you doing it properly? If you extend credit for windmills or destroying your farmland with solar panels, well, you are not going to be increasing your ability to produce. And you are not going to be able to ultimately, as a nation, not the particular project, pay it back. So it always cycles back to this question of man improving the physical economy by, again, thinking, as your question implies, about how do we do something in the future. But after you ask that question, you have to have an actual scientific understanding of, is what I am trying to do in the future actually going to resonate with the way the universe works so that we do actually increase our production? That's what I'd say. I don't know if Barbara wants to add anything. Barbara, you're muted.
I can't unmute you.
There we go.
There.
Okay. Sorry. No, I think that's a very adequate answer. The question is, paint yourself a picture of the future. And then, which Trump is clearly doing when he's talking about we're going to have a golden age for the United States, a new renaissance for the United States. One working spouse can support an entire family. Workers' wages are going to go up. All of those things are a prerequisite to actually, your key aspect of development is you want to treasure the human mind, not the ding, 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 ding of the Wall Street bell, but how do you actually cultivate creativity for the future? And, we haven't been doing that for a very long time. In fact, the whole idea of the Tavistock Institute in Britain and elsewhere was we have to undermine this thing in America, which is being technologically progressive and constantly saying they want to be in the next frontier. And we haven't thought that way in a long, long time until Trump came along and reintroduced it as the identity, really, of all human beings in the United States.
Just like to give a quick shout out. To Barnes. Promethean updates deliver the receipts with fact-based information and not biased emotion and vain rhetoric. Yes, that's right. We're trying to actually move people to take political action. And so thank you for recognizing our unique role in the world. And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Black Tie. Thank you very much for your support from across the pond. Even though it's hard for us to really understand the details of what's happening, all the local details and things that are happening, we do understand that the people of the United Kingdom of England and of all the UK are coming under a massive attack through the globalist forces. So thank you very much for your support. We can't do any of this without our supporters. Okay, so the next The next questions, we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to help us support our efforts. So I'd like to start with this question and comment from Michael. Firstly, let me say thank you for the incredible work you are engaged in and the truth and transparency you bring to the subjects discussed. My question, given the Herculean challenge placed before Donald Trump, who has demonstrated Herculean qualities unique to himself, how far along the path of removing those determined to crush our Western way of life and its historical cultures do you feel the president will get before the 2028 elections? And can we hope that he finds a way to run again for president in order to complete his unfinished work? Regards and thanks. Thank you, Michael, for your question and comments. Okay, and I'm going to group them in here with the next one. Has there been any more significant weeks in American history than this just passed? If so, whenabouts? And how might it or they compare to President Trump's achievements thus far? Thank you, Russ, for your comments. Does the membership at Promethean Action realize the elites are extremely intelligent? Well, I don't know how intelligent they are. Unless all of you begin the process of raising your intellectual levels up to theirs, their agendas will continue to be implemented. Why? And the answer is the elites are the real rulers and controllers of this planet, not its managers or governors. Thank you, George, for that insightful comment. And the fourth thing here that we're going to discuss too, can you provide 3 or 4 titles of Lyndon LaRouche's books that can provide a good entry into his work for a complete beginner? Thanks for all the great education you provide each week. Thank you, Neil. I think this is probably the key question out of the 4, right? What do Americans have to do to raise their intellectual levels up?
Well, I'll start with that because there's sort of 2 prongs to this. I'm going to start with the Promethean Action prong of it. And I think Barbara will be able to answer that question more relating to the 2028 election from the standpoint of the Promethean PAC side of this. But obviously, well, I sort of agree with Mike. There's a certain feral intelligence of the elites. A sort of species hatred for humanity. Our movement has, for decades, been focused on precisely the question of making every American citizen a citizen statesman. You know, Benjamin Franklin famously said, "I've given you a republic if you can keep it." Well, the first step in keeping a republic is understanding what a republic is. A republic, as opposed to a democracy, recognizes that there are universal principles. And it's not simply a question of majority rule, because the majority can be quite wrong. It's a question of organizing your society so that your governing institutions at all levels, so your social and cultural institutions at all levels, are always engaged in a search for the truth, are always engaged in a search for what are the knowable principles. This is why Charlie Kirk was such a powerful, powerful force, and in his martyrdom, I believe, will continue to be a powerful, powerful force, because he was constantly engaged in an internal, not just an external process, but an internal process of discovery, of rediscovery, of rethinking, of understanding, and so on. I think as people have seen and heard in the wake of his assassination, he was constantly rethinking his positions on things as he learned more, as he recalibrated based on further knowledge. And that is very much what Promethean Action is all about. For those who may not be familiar with why we chose the name Promethean, of course, Prometheus, the myth of Prometheus, written by Aeschylus in around 450 BC, was about the Greek god who broke with the rest of the gods, who are like a metaphor for the oligarchs or the elites, in order to give fire to mankind so that mankind could develop. And there's a very important passage in Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, where Prometheus says to his audience, but I gave them more than fire. I gave them the knowledge of the rising and the settings of the stars so they could discover the seasons, i.e., so you could have agriculture. I gave them the knowledge of how to build carriages so they didn't have to be beasts of burden. I gave them the knowledge of how to build houses so they didn't have to live in caves. I gave them the knowledge of, science and letters and writing so that ideas could be propagated beyond simply an oral tradition and so on. So our entire purpose for being is to continue that kind of Promethean mission. If we do that, the elites will be left in the dust, because what they operate on is the basis of a false idea of how the universe works. They think man is no better than an animal. They think they're better bred with bluer blood, so they get the right to rule, or they have more money, so they get the right to rule. But they do not believe there are laws in the universe. They think it's simply a question of power, their ability to impose their power over nations, populations, and so on. And as the Prometheus myth demonstrates, when mankind uses his God-given creative powers, you do free yourself from the elites. Now, that all being said, I want to give people a quick tour of how Promethean Action has been doing that this week. Adam, could you share the screen? Okay. This is how Promethean Action then takes these ideas and puts them into action. This week we had a team. I think there were various points in the week where we had 10 people. I think this is most of them up on Capitol Hill. They were there for a week last week. They were able to visit every single Republican Senate and congressional office in Congress. And they also met with a number of Democratic offices, some of whom are not completely crazy and hostile. And the next picture shows you just a sort of a collage of some of their many meetings. Again, it was hundreds of offices. They visited. In some cases, it might not have been much more than leaving some material, but in many cases, it was extremely substantive discussion, and we will be following up with the staff. So we believe that the powerful ideas of actual economic development can transform institutions throughout society, including the Congress. Next, this was some of the literature we took to Capitol Hill, and we'll have Adam put this in the show notes when we post this tomorrow. This is a very beautiful flyer designed by one of the people who went on the trip, which shows how much progress Trump has already made in launching this process of an American manufacturing revolution. And then quickly, I want to show you some of our other activity around the country. And I want to encourage people, especially in the United States, to reach out to us. We may be active in your area. If we're not active in your particular area, we may know other people in your area. And we want to take these ideas and put them into motion. So
yeah, let me say a quick thing about what you just said, Susan. So if you want to get active in this political action that you see, because we really do have a nationwide political movement, please get our newsletter. I'd say that's the first step. You can get the newsletter by the link is in the description. You can just go to prom.ac. That's an actual website. That'll take you to our Promethean Action website. The subscribe button is right on the front page. Get it. Don't even worry about paying for it. Just get the free version of our newsletter. And then when I send out an email tomorrow, because I'm going to send out the email of the show recording to everyone tomorrow, I'm going to put a place where you can leave your question. And if you want to get active, all you have to do is just reply to one of our emails and tell us you want to get active with us. And one of our organizers will get back to you. So really the best way to get active with us, the first step is to get our email newsletter. The link's right there. So back to, sorry,
Sure.
Susan.
So just a quick tour of some of the other things we did in the last couple of weeks. Here we are with a Promethean action table at a local gun show in Michigan with some of our organizers and activists. And what we do at these shows is get out our literature and get people to sign up so that they're in touch with us. Here's this also gets to the specifics of that question in terms of educating Americans. This is a meeting our Houston group held on Trump's actual economic policies. The gentleman on the right there is a trained engineer, and he gave people a very, very in-depth slideshow presentation about how Trump is rejecting the insane green policies and unleashing the productive power of the United States. And then finally, I was invited to speak as Promethean Action to what was called a Faith and Legislative Summit in southeastern Michigan, where I was able to present to an audience of pastors, political activists, and others what Promethean Action's mission is. So as you can see, we are taking the biggest ideas that exist, which is that man has the responsibility to continue God's creation in the universe. And we are taking these ideas out in a very aggressive organizing offensive throughout the United States. So as Adam said, please sign up for our newsletter so that we can plug you into this activity one way or the other. That's the Promethean Action commercial break. Now we go to Promethean PAC.
Well, look, we're preparing for the midterms, which everybody knows is going to be crucial. People want to talk about Trump 2028. We got to solve the problem of Trump 2026 at this point. Clearly, if the Republicans take the House, we're going to be back into the type of chaos which predominated in
You
Trump's
mean if the
first term.
Democrats take the House?
Yeah, waking up here. So we'll be back to complete chaos. They'll impeach Trump again. The lawfare will start again. All that stuff is going to happen. Now, what we find on the ground in all the places that Susan's talking about is not a lot of people fully understand what Trump is doing in terms of economics. And the entire issue of the midterms is going to be that famous question that everybody asks: are you better off today than you were when, basically Joe Biden left office? And Trump has to have solutions at that point in place so that either we've solved it or people are very confident in seeing that we're on the way to a solution. A lot of the problems we're having right now with people's impatience is you can't rebuild an economy like ours virtually overnight. You've got to come up with all sorts of solutions to put things in place which will actually rebuild that physical economy, starting obviously with energy, which is in part what he's actually started with. If you can bring the cost of energy down for people, energy is a factor in every single good and service people actually encounter in life. He's also, basically reshoring as fast as he can all of these manufacturing capabilities which we need in terms of metals, in terms of auto parts, in terms of everything else that actually comes into having a supply chain which works at low cost. And we're no longer going to be dependent on China for every single aspect of our lives. That was really quite a huge, stupid and deadly exit which was done here. So Promethean PAC is going to be endorsing candidates as we get more heavily into the actual countdown to the midterms, based on how much we think the candidates actually understand Trump's true policies. We're going to be quizzing them We're going to be saturating the country as much as we can with the flyer you just saw and the flyer which
Adam,
Trump.
can you share the screen?
We want people to take these things. They are a true conversation opener. If you're going out and you say, well, I've never talked to people about politics in my lifetime this way, well, this will help you a lot, because what Trump is doing is he's completely transformed the Republican Party from the country club, Chamber of Commerce, Koch brothers nonsense into a party which is dedicated to raising the standard of living of the working and middle classes. We want to saturate the country with this stuff, and we want to make any candidate's understanding of this the primary way that you actually determine who you're going to vote for. So that's what the PAC is up to at this point in time.
Yeah, and I really do want to encourage people to go to the Promethean PAC website. You can get 100 copies of this half-page flyer, which is very beautiful and very powerful, and it is a conversation starter for just a donation of $23, and it goes up depending on how many you want. We have these circulating all over the country now. I just worked with a group in Arizona, a conservative group in a county in Arizona, which is going to be producing these on their own so they can use them in all of their organizing in their county. People are taking them to political events. You saw us at that gun show in Michigan. We had a stack of those on the table at the gun show for people to organize. So we need you to back up Promethean PAC as well, because we're the PAC is the political spear point, which is taking the ideas and sharpening them so that we can cut through the fog of politics and bring these very powerful ideas in.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. All right, thank you. Let me just do a quick recap here. First off, thank you everyone for tuning in. We super appreciate your support. This is our Promethean Actions live question and answer show. We do this every Thursday at the same time. Please like this video if you haven't yet already. It increases our reach on YouTube. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have 3 political briefings a week, plus this live show we do every Thursday. So we'd like for you to make sure you see our next political update, which is going to be on Saturday. Okay, I'm going to break from the questions I've collected and go to 2 that have come in the chat in the last 10 minutes or so. The first one is from Carol, and this question is coming up a lot in the chat, and also I just got an email about this. Would love to hear your perspectives on these rogue judges trying to stop the president from exercising his constitutional powers. Thank you, Carol. I'd like to open it up with Barbara and Susan.
Well, when you look at these judges who have come in over the past 2 decades, they're completely different than the judges I actually encountered when I was doing a certain amount of paralegal work. And those judges, be they Republican or Democrat, were actually completely immersed in the Constitution and making sure that you got a fair and adequate hearing of whatever your claim was. Right now, all of this stuff about DEI, the stuff about identity politics, the stuff about, Black Lives Matter came out of the law schools. Most people don't realize that, but it didn't necessarily come from the universities. It came out of the law schools. So you have all of these crazed leftists who are now judges, including, I guess, the best representative on the Supreme Court is Ketanji Brown Jackson, who couldn't define in her confirmation hearing what a woman was. So, basically what's going on is there's a big debate, some of which is being run by the president himself, about what really are the Article 2 powers of the President of the United States, and can the judiciary actually involve itself in exercising those powers in the president's stead. And the Supreme Court so far has ruled with the administration, despite everything that's going on with these crazy lower court judges. But you're going to have a problem for a while. I don't know what's going to happen with the Comey case. It's in the Eastern District of Virginia. That is basically a very, very, very liberal insurrectionist judge, place now. And I think as we go forward, the Supreme Court, in a couple of cases which are on the docket this term, are going to define very clearly what the president's powers actually are, and is going to tell the lower courts to, basically get with it, or we here at the Supreme Court are going to start to discipline you accordingly. So that's my perspective of what I think is going on. And we'll just have to watch it play out.
Thank you, Barbara. Susan, any comments?
No, but I do want to tell you, Adam, somebody in the chat said, I can't find the newsletter button. It's the subscribe button on Promethean Action.
Yeah, let me just clarify that. If you just hit the subscribe button, we're going to send you a daily email. So just to clarify that, yeah, just go to our website. The subscribe button is in the lower left-hand corner, I believe. And that'll just take you through a quick sign-up process. And make sure you hit the confirmation email, because we're a legitimate double opt-in list. So it'll say, just confirm that you want to subscribe, and we send you a link. So yes, just use the subscribe button. You'll get our email. Okay. I'd like to take another question here, which we addressed earlier, but I think this is such an important thing that I want to just bring it up again so we can comment on it. So this is from Kingfisher. Why the hell is Trump providing the Nazis in Ukraine with weapons? Please answer this question. So Barbara and Susan, why is Trump providing patriots and weapons now to the Nazis in Ukraine?
Not all the Ukrainians are Nazis. Admittedly, there's a big and significant portion of the military which are actual Nazis. So thank you for that recognition, Kingfisher. Most of our establishment politicians refuse to actually acknowledge that. It was very much a part of Congress who at one point said the President of the United States shouldn't be providing weapons to Nazis. They actually confirmed your response there. A lot of them at this point have either been killed in terms of the military, or they're kind of integrated into the overall Ukrainian army. What Trump is trying to do is to once again take two, as he said yesterday, two countries who hate each other based on long-standing grievances. The Nazis in Ukraine, for example, all rally around the figure of Stepan Bandera. What was he? He was a British agent who actually ran operations against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. When you hear the term Slava Ukrainia, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about Nazism, okay? So what Trump is trying to do is not have Ukraine completely overwhelmed and taken over by the Russians, which in many respects, I don't think Putin wants. And as I understand it, for the most part, these are defensive weapons. They're, not every Ukrainian, child or family are Nazis, yet they're being killed in this war and not being killed because their military are actually engaged in warfare. So he's giving them the capacity to defend themselves. And he also, by doing that, apart from everybody's intuition, is he's making himself, just as in the case of Israel, much more popular among Ukrainians than Volodymyr Zelensky, because they basically are seeing that we're not going to leave you out here to essentially be conquered. And Ukraine is losing the war at this point, has been. So, I just think that it's part and parcel, and getting these idiots in Congress off his back, also in terms of negotiating this. I think that's the impetus and that's the reason for it. Personally, I can't stand certain people who are around him at this point, like John Radcliffe or the man I call General Cornflake, i.e. Keith Kellogg. But I'm sure in terms of how Trump is thinking about this, he's probably thinking about it a little bit differently than my reaction based on things I don't really know fully to the extent to be able to take a position.
Thank you, King Fisher, for your question. All right, so the next question here I'm going to take from our email newsletter. How does Ronald Reagan and the collapse of the Soviet Union fit into the scheme of the British Empire? Did this advance or hinder their plans? Thank you, Chuck, for this very prescient question. I'm just going to start off by saying, yes, this was part of their scheme, and this did advance their plans. So I'd like to open this up for Barbara and Susan. I'm sure they're going to have a lot to say about this one.
Well, there were several levels to this, and we were very much in the middle of this. Lyndon LaRouche was brought into the first Reagan administration, first in the transition team, and then as an unofficial but very directly deployed back channel to the Soviet Union on behalf of Ronald Reagan, deployed through the National Security Council on the issue of what Reagan ultimately announced in 1983 of the Strategic Defense Initiative. This is an idea that LaRouche planted in Reagan's mind when they were on the campaign trail in 1980 in New Hampshire. And it fit with both Reagan and, as we later see, Donald Trump's passion that you do not want a world held hostage by thermonuclear weapons. You do not want a world where the doctrine of mutual and assured destruction is the Damocles sword hanging over the head of every man, woman, and child on this planet. Reagan wanted a way out, just as Donald Trump wants a way out. So the SDI probably would have advanced more quickly if Reagan hadn't almost been assassinated in March of 1981. But in the year prior to Reagan's announcement of the Strategic Defense Initiative, Lyndon LaRouche regularly took messages from the White House to the Soviet embassy and back again, because Reagan wanted to explore with the Soviets in this kind of unofficial back channel how they would respond to the United States dumping the policy of mutual and assured destruction and instead establishing a policy of defense, which, as Reagan said, would render thermonuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. And Reagan was prepared to share these technologies with the Soviets in order to, again, eliminate this Damocles sword of thermonuclear annihilation. And LaRouche presented these proposals in these back channel discussions. Here's the problem that the Soviets had. The Soviets had an economy which was based on a lot of investment in their defense economy, but a very stultified civilian economy. And they knew that their civilian economy would not be able to benefit and absorb a big leap in technological advance that these new systems would provide. They knew the United States would outpace them because the communist system, frankly, just didn't work that well. And they rejected Reagan's offer. And instead, what they said is, well, we're going to try and just expand our traditional nuclear capabilities, military capabilities, so that we can stay ahead of the United States, even if they go ahead with the SDI, which of course we never did. That forced march military buildup inside the Soviet Union was one of the things that brought them down. Their economy simply could not sustain it. Communist economics just don't work. And that's why more than a year before the Berlin Wall came down, LaRouche talked about the fact that the Soviet Empire I think this was 1988, he gave this speech that the Soviet Empire would disintegrate. So it was Reagan's adoption of the SDI that kind of panicked the Soviets into this massive military economic mobilization, which was the final straw that broke the camel's back. What the British then did is what Barbara said earlier. Rather than, once communism disintegrated, rather than we in the West saying, wow, okay, well, these countries can now become sovereign economic entities. They can become our partners in a new world. The global elite, and Jeffrey Sachs was very much a part of this, said, oh boy, here's a new area we can now come in and loot with our globalist financial institutions, which they did, which Putin has been elected, I think now 3 times, essentially, to reverse and rebuild the Russian economy. So it's a very important part of history that very few people know anything about. But the fact that Trump wants to revive, he calls it the Golden Dome, but revive the idea of getting rid of the world of thermonuclear weapons, where nations have the ability to defend themselves, but where we're not going to be held hostage by blowing up the entire planet because somebody mistakes a flock of geese for, an ICBM, is something which is very much on the table. And there is a direct arc from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump. I don't know if Barbara wants to add anything more on that.
No, I thought you handled it very well.
And by the way, if anybody, I'll just say, I don't know if you can still see this. Maybe you can get it on YouTube or something. The movie that was done, I think it was last year, called Reagan, which starred Randy Quaid as Reagan. It's actually a very, very powerful movie which tells this story. And if people haven't seen it and they have access to it, I was very moved by it. Of course, I was in DC when LaRouche was doing all of this with the Reagan administration. So it was very personal to me, but it's a very well done, powerful movie.
All right. Thank you, Susan and Barbara. And thank you to Bill Vickers. Bill's been coming back week after week now to join us for these live broadcasts. Bill, thank you very much for your support from up north. I wish we had more of an inside line about what was truly going on there, but we support the fight for the Canadian people to finally get independence from this globalist empire that this leftist globalist empire that we're all suffering from. So thank you very much, Bill, for the support. We really appreciate it. Okay, I'd like to take another question from our email newsletter. There's several questions in one. My questions might well require a few episodes or several. I beg your indulgence, they're too complex. Okay. So yeah, I'll just read your questions. Let's see if we can address these. Many commentators on the financial side of MAGA maintain that a key piece involves taking down the entire central bank system and most especially the Federal Reserve. Do you agree? So yes, we do agree, but I'll let Barbara and Boyd and Susan respond. Are all central banks connected? Can they all to some degree be considered private? And do they act together to force governments to obey not only economic policies, but socioeconomic ones as well? Yes, they do, such as undermining the family through pansexualism and feminism, and the population of a green pagan religion to infiltrate and replace Christianity. Yes, I do think that's happening. Where does the strange anti-human ideology, i.e. depopulation, deindustrialization, and mind control of the globalist elite really come from? For if all private central banks must be removed from decision-making power, what kind of system can replace it worldwide? Oh, I know I have plenty of thoughts on this. And can the major powers find a new, more stable equilibrium if the full cultural and productive capabilities of all nations are enabled after the fall of this fake financial system? So much more. Thank you so much for your valiant efforts. And thank you, Don. Clearly, you are thinking about some of the most important issues facing the United States and the world. So I'd like to open up this question and comment to Barbara and Susan for their comment.
Susan, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I'll address some of it. Yeah, I think the Trump and the Trump administration do fully understand the problem of central banking. I think they also understand that you are not going to take down the Federal Reserve in short order. I think what you see from the administration is opening up a very important dialogue with the American population. This is the first administration I've ever seen in my lifetime, which is challenging, as Bessent said, the very mission of the Federal Reserve. I think what this administration is trying to do is, first of all, rein in the powers of the Fed. I mean, because look, they've got a lot on their plate. Donald Trump has, a little more than 3 years left in his first term. We do have to get through the midterms to make sure that the second half of his first term is not crippled. I don't think taking down the Federal Reserve is on the agenda in the immediate period ahead. What they're doing is they're beginning to create the dialogue, educating the American people that this is a problem. And I think simultaneously they're beginning to set up certain alternate institutions, because it's one thing they want to do is they want to prevent the Fed from acting in a destructive way, as we've seen with high interest rates and unfettered money printing. They want to kind of cut it back to a much smaller footprint that it used to have prior to the 1960s and even prior to the 1930s. But I think what they're also very aggressively exploring is setting up new kinds of institutions. It falls under the generic name of a sovereign wealth fund. I don't think Trump is going to do that per se. I think he's got a few other things cooking in the background, where you get institutions which can begin to play a kind of a national bank role. They aren't going to be issuing currency as a national bank would, but they're going to be channeling credit into the productive economy. So I think that's how this administration is thinking about the Fed. As I understand it, basically, the central banks, while they may not internationally be formally connected, certainly are connected from the standpoint that it's the same global elite that pretty much run all of them. Your second and third questions, I think, get to a much more important point. And again, as important as institutions are, a central banking institution is antithetical to a republic. Other institutions are antithetical. A national bank is much more in keeping with our republic. It is always going to come back to what is your image of man. Instead of starting with the institutions and back engineering, start with what is your image of man. And your questions very much went to that. The oligarchy creates anti-human ideologies of transgenderism, green ideology. You listed a whole bunch of them in your question. And they've understood that probably much more powerful than financial control or military control is ideological control. If you can brainwash a population, you don't need billy clubs. If you can brainwash a population into thinking economics is based on gambling casino economics, in a certain sense, the institutions are just the transmission belts for that ideology, which is why we've always focused on the fundamental questions. Everything has to start with, what is your image of man? Are we in the image of the Creator with the injunction to continue God's creation? Or are we just animals to be culled, as Prince Philip said? If you start there, you can start to pull the thread on all sorts of policies and all sorts of conflicts.
Yeah, I think the answer is that all of these things are, excuse me, I've got allergies today. All of these things are ways to control the middle and lower classes of people as they begin to exercise political power at any point in history. An empire always comes in with the idea, number one, depopulation. They think that the more populations grow, the less ability to control populations exists for them. deindustrialization. Well, if we took everything back to kind of feudal estates, city states, and the empire has actually said this, rather than full-blown nation states able to service themselves and their population, we're in much better, stead than if we don't do that as the elites. Mind control. The British Empire is really based at this point on what they call soft power, okay? Because they recognize that if you can rewrite a people's history, which they've done with, such things as the 1619 Project and all of this nonsense, and if you can actually figure out how to keep people stuck in a certain identity, which they've used the internet for, and not break through to a higher level of identity, then you can control the population. And that is essentially what they're out to do. It's failing. If you think about all the weapons which were actually hurled at Donald Trump in 2024, trying to put him in jail all over the country, trying to kill him twice, all this other stuff, the American people rose up and said, no, we're going to vote for an actual real change. And we're going to empower, which is what Trump is doing, completely contrary to their vision. We're going to empower the working class. We're going to empower the middle class. And we're going to train them to actually use their minds like a boxer uses his fists, so to speak, to take power away from these disgusting people who represent the world's elite.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Okay, we're getting some more really good super chats. I'd like to give a shout out to Carl Centers, who sends in a comment on Massey. I think a lot of our people are probably thinking something similar. Trump shed the light on fake news. Why hasn't he reinstated the Smith Act? And what's Trump's deal with Thomas Massey? Or I think Massey is one of the best people in Congress. So I'd like to open this up to Barbara and Susan. What are your thoughts on Massey? And I'm not certain what the Smith Act is yet.
You're
Unmute
muted,
yourself.
Barbara.
Yeah.
I have to, if it is what I remember it being, it has to do with the capacity to put down people who are working for the violent overthrow of the United States government, which there's lots of other laws which can be used. Thomas Massey is an egomaniac and essentially has gotten ahead of himself. I also admire him at a certain point, but he's not really one of the best people in Congress. He's one of the best people in putting himself forward rather than actually looking at Trump's agenda and helping the president to realize those goals. This White House isn't what's portrayed in the news media, some kind of thug force which has blackmail material on all these Republicans in Congress. That's not true. The president is essentially engaged in conducting an ongoing dialogue with everybody, and Massey has refused to participate in it. It's a little bit of what Trump called rightly the panicking group of people. They see a process of negotiation, horse trading, typical legislation stuff, war and peace stuff, and they jump to the conclusion, oh, Trump's going to sell out on X or Y, so I got to oppose him. And he hasn't sold out on X or Y, no matter what people are actually thinking about. If you look at his actions, as opposed to how the rotten media describes his actions. So that's what I'd say about that. He's obviously, I agree with him on the issues of war and peace. His economics, in my view, sucks because he's a total libertarian, and we're not going to get anywhere with that kind of economics. We need the American system if we're going to actually put this economy back in its rightful place.
Susan?
Yeah, I just underscore the libertarian problem because, and that's not just Thomas Massey. That's a whole lot of people. This is a British concocted ideology, that there is such a thing as a free market, where if everybody unleashes their own personal passions in terms of what they want the most of, sex, drugs, money, or whatever, somehow an invisible hand is going to sort this all out, and we're going to have nirvana. Well, you don't have nirvana. You have exactly what happened to the U.S. economy under free trade, under speculation, under the growth of the drug trade, and so on and so forth. When I spoke to this faith and leadership conference last week, I made the point Promethean Action has kind of got its own unique role in this movement, because we're the only people who consciously put forward the proposition economics has to be based on the same moral principles as everything else. It's not just a question of organizing your economy from unfettered greed. Economics has to be a subset of the question of a republic. And as I said before, how does the universe work? How does man's mind comprehend it? How do we put that to work in terms of new technologies, new investments, better culture, better ways of organizing your society so that you can lift up the population? That's only done through a conscious intervention of the human mind. That is not done by some invisible hand. And that's the problem with libertarians. And that's where a lot of Republicans are running up against the fact that Donald Trump ain't a libertarian.
Thank you very much, Susan and Barbara. And thank you, Carl, for your question. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Ura, who's been joining us all these weeks. Okay, Candace Owens, is there a possibility she is working for her father-in-law, who is a British lord? Any comments? I didn't know that. Any comments?
Well, she's certainly not, in my view, behaving exactly rationally, which would make her coherent with a British lord. But I don't know that there's a direct connection there.
She is married to at least a British businessman. That much I know. But yeah, I would just underscore what Barbara said. Whatever the connections are, she's part of this operation, which we may get to in another question, but there is a real effort by the British to unleash religious warfare in the United States. You have an upsurge of anti-Semitism, which is different from being against the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu. People get that straight. There's Benjamin Netanyahu and the Zionist policies in Israel, which President Trump obviously just pulled the chain on. And then there's the fact that you have Jewish people all over the world. And if you're falling into this trap of, all the Jews are out to take care of all of the world, on behalf of the globalists or the Rothschilds or whatever, you've fallen for the British game. We may get to this more in another question, but the same thing with this anti-Muslim sentiment. All Muslims want a caliphate and they want to kill all the Christians and kill all the Jews. These are British operations. Whenever you get into these things where you're throwing a broad blanket out and saying, I hate this entire group of people, as opposed to there's an oligarchical idea which I will fight wherever it manifests itself, and I will fight for the Republican with a small r idea of mankind wherever it manifests itself. So, Candace Owens, to my thinking, is certainly part of this operation of recreating religious tension in the United States, when Donald Trump just showed us in the Mideast that you can supersede all of that.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Quick shout out here to Promethean Action. This is, if you're just tuning in, this is our weekly question and answer show. We do every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. If you've been enjoying this broadcast, if you just tuned in, please give this video a like. It helps our reach on YouTube. And please subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet already. We do 3 political updates a week on Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And we also do a live question and answer show. So please subscribe to us on YouTube and hit the notification bell so you get notifications on when we release our next video. Okay, our next 3 topics that I have queued up here are coming from both the chat and from our newsletter questions. So I'm going to pull up the question I got from the chat, and I'm also going to pull up here the one that we got from the newsletter, because clearly people are thinking about this. I read that President Trump struck a deal to allow Qatar to build an air base in Idaho. When is he concerned with safety and borders? Why would he allow an Arab country to have a military presence in the heart of America? I have never heard of such a thing before. What interests could they be protecting, and why is this being allowed? Thank you, Brenda. I'll read Laura's question here. Pete Hegseth said the U.S. was going to allow Qatar to build a military base next to our base in Idaho. What are your thoughts? And then the second, almost identical question. Hegseth announced Qatar to build a military base in Idaho. Just curious as to how that fits in with the current geopolitical strategy. Thank you, Will, for your question. So I'd like to open up the floor to Barbara and Susan.
I don't know enough to actually be able to pin down what I think about this. The question I have is, why are we doing this? What's the benefit to the military in our country? And what's the benefit to stabilization in turn of the Middle East? And I don't know the answers to those questions. So that's where I'm unfortunately going to have to leave it until I can figure out more as to what's going on here.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes, I have to agree. When I was putting these questions together, I had only just heard about it myself last night. So we don't have a really good lead on this yet. Susan, do you have any comments on this?
No, I don't. I mean, we have allowed other countries to have training and other kinds of operations in the United States in the past. I don't think we've ever had a full military base. So I'm going to go with Barbara that we're going to have to dive into this a little more deeply.
Okay. Next set of questions here. So thank you, everyone, for sending in that question. My next set of questions is going to be on Venezuela and Cuba. Okay. I am Cuban born and would like for your team to discuss the Cuban situation and whether, along with Venezuela, Cuba will soon be free. Cuba is the head of the snake. Thank you, and thank you for your amazing analysis of this world. Thank you, Laura, for your comment. And excuse me. And we had a question here from Peter Cook. It would be great to hear Barbara and Susan's views on Trump's strategy in Venezuela. Is he drumming up a war, or is this propaganda? So Barbara and Susan, Cuba and Venezuela, what's going on there?
Well, with respect to Venezuela, as I understand it, the primary impetus for it is their role in the drug trade, which is historic. They've traditionally been a route for drugs coming into the United States from Colombia and other nations in Iberoamerica, which the president has basically said, we're considering Dope Inc., so to speak, to be an enemy combatant of the United States, and we're going to go after that. What that has to do with getting rid of Maduro, who is really not a great leader for the Venezuelan people and has cheated in every election, at least according to them, I don't know. What it has to do with any kind of new strategy towards Cuba, I don't know. I can only place it in the context of when you revive an entire economy like he's trying to do with the United States, who are our best trading partners? Well, that clearly is, as has been traditionally, the nations south of our border, along with the one nation north of our border. And what I believe Trump is trying to do is to create a new kind of Monroe Doctrine, which is essentially to say China shouldn't be doing things in the Western Hemisphere. These are our trading partners, and we're going to do everything we can to develop these countries, which has not been the strategy of Wall Street or the City of London to date. And I think that's a part of what's going on here, but I can't really speak to the ultimate destination without really seeing how things are going to develop.
Susan?
No, and I am not an expert at all on Cuba, so I'm going to pass on that part of it.
Okay, thank you. Next question is going to be on where we stand on Russia. So again, this is a question that's coming into both the Super Chat, and I have questions here from our email newsletter. What does Promethean stand on Russia? Does Promethean think Russia is with Trump? Thank you to our international supporter there. And let me pull up this question from our newsletter. Isn't sending Tomahawks to Ukraine just going to enforce a stronger war and have Russia retaliate against us? Well, just to interrupt, so we just got announcement by Trump literally an hour and a half ago saying that Trump and Putin should be making statements on something like this very soon. Also, what are your thoughts on Qatar building an airport?
You know, one of our friends just texted me the update on this. As far as I can see, this is being blown out of proportion. This is not a standalone military base. This is a not unusual partnership in terms of training, especially pilots, using a dedicated training facility on a U.S. airbase. This is not unusual. And I think it's part and parcel of, again, this anti-Muslim hysteria, which is being whipped up along with anti-Semitic sentiment to create religious conflict, as opposed to being very strategic and precise and looking at where the imperial ideology is residing versus where ideologies which are at least compatible with our outlook are residing. So I think, because I've seen a lot of chatter about this too, and the fact that it's now come up a couple of times. I think it's part of the enemy trying to inflame the situation. And I'll say once again, Donald Trump just proved, Jews are not our enemies. Muslims are not our enemies. Radical ideologies and the British Empire are our enemies. And when you recognize that, you can resolve the other conflicts.
Barbara?
With respect to the Tomahawks, if that's followed through and they're given permission, there are two steps to this, to use them to actually strike deep inside Russia. It's an obvious escalation, and that's what Putin has said. But my view is that Trump is really trying to broker peace here. And you got to understand, everybody might think it's passé, but when he says, I need to stop the killing, that is his passion. And, he says, I used to have a great relationship with Putin, but in essence, what's going on is he's not stopping the killing at this point. So I got to do something about that. It's a pretty simple equation. I do believe that back channel stuff is going on, which makes it very difficult to evaluate exactly where things stand. Dmitriev, the close supporter of President Putin, has a tweet today saying the dialogue is continuing. If we were going to go to war with Russia, I don't think we would have basically had joint training exercises with Belarus, which we actually had, 2 months ago. If you're going to war with somebody, you don't show your hand in joint military exercises at all. So I think a lot of this is basically the same way he does everything. He creates a new narrative. He creates a new way of looking at things, and then invites people to actually respond And I think, obviously, if you ask me, should we provide tomahawks to Ukraine? I would probably go back to the Trump conversation from his first term, where he said, "Why in the hell are we giving this corrupt nation any money?" But this is politics, and it is how you actually bring about peace by having to, have two sides to the argument come into some type of relationship. And right now, at least as he describes it, they're very, very far apart based on ancient hatreds. And I'm hoping this conversation that's going on now is actually going to advance things.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Okay, if you're just tuning in, we are coming to the end, but this is Promethean Action's live question and answer show. We do this show every Thursday. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Jeff that just came in. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. I know you've been following us in these live shows for a while. I don't know if you get our newsletter though. Make sure you get our email newsletter and you're tuning into our other political updates that we do. Okay, I think I'm going to end with a question that is, we've had a rather international discussion today. I want to take something that's more domestic. Who is funding Adam Schiff? In an email this week, you stated Adam Shifty Schiff was so dishonest and corrupt. So many laws and protocols were violated and just plain broken. As you know, predators such as Schiff do not act when there is no profit or benefit to themselves. How is this guy profiting? Are his emails and phone being monitored? His internet usage? There has to be more than just breaking the law regarding primary resident. Okay, thank you, Russ, for your question on Adam Schiff. So I think the greater question is who's funding these operations?
Well, Schiff has the whole Democratic Party funding apparatus behind him, and Trump is now targeting that entire funding apparatus under the terrorism laws. And that means that basically he's being monitored, and he's been told to preserve his, actual documents and everything else. Thanks, Andrew, for noticing my corgi going wild here. But essentially, I think he's going to get potentially indicted, if not completely outed, and his funding base is going to be destroyed by this. He's clearly a part of the ongoing conspiracy. Remember, he started in a House Intelligence panel with Russiagate, and he was the key figure in the House, who actually did that. I haven't looked at McCarty. I haven't looked at his funding. It's very easy to do. You just go to either the Federal Election Campaign.
No,
FEC.
Barbara, I think this is a little bit more sinister. I think he's joking by implying that you didn't say Jews.
Oh, I see. All right. Got it. All right. So, what I'm saying is that in terms of this conspiracy case, which is being put together, there's a grand jury apparently meeting in Fort Pierce in Florida to do the whole thing, not just did he engage in mortgage fraud, to do the whole sequence of events running from Russiagate through the election in 2024. And that's, basically the answer to your question. He's targeted. When the president puts something out like he did on Truth Social, you know that he's targeted.
Barbara, people love corgis in the chat. Can you pick up your dog and just show your corgi? Is he going to allow that? If not, it's okay. No, don't worry about it if it's going to bother him too much. Okay, let me just check here. Let me just check for some last questions and comments here. Let's see here. Okay. So I think we covered a lot of topics this week. We have a lot of stuff to follow up. Obviously, what's going on right now with the negotiation with Putin is still ongoing. I think we're all about to finish this webcast here and go see what Trump and Putin are going to say. Trump hasn't updated his Truth Social yet, so I don't know if there's any updates on what's going on. And also, we're going to be following this China trade negotiation issue carefully. So any final wrap-up comments, Barbara or Susan?
Well, I would just say to people, there is an action aspect to this. As we often say, we don't just analyze, we organize. And we're developing this strategic picture for people for a reason. We have to keep the Trump revolution going, and that is in the midterm elections. We need to have on-the-ground intelligence from different parts of the country. So again, I underscore Adam's plea that people should subscribe to our newsletter and get directly in touch with us. We have active operations on the ground in Texas, California, Washington State, Virginia, Michigan, and to a certain degree, Florida. That's not a whole lot of states. There's a lot of other swing states out there in particular, where the more that we're active on the ground, able to directly intervene with our literature and with our ideas, and also get feedback from people in terms of what is going on so we can be very precise in our intervention going into 2026. I just want to leave this call from the standpoint of action. We have to act, and we have to act. Frankly, we're pretty damn close to the midterms. If any of you are involved in politics like I am, 13 months out means it's right around the corner. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Barbara?
Very much. I mean, all of the warfare to try and seize your brain into various forms of things which are not terribly productive occurs on the internet and through social media. So, basically, my overall thought is don't jump for all the clickbait that's out there. Most of you do not. In fact, that's one of the reasons why people say they appreciate us. But you got to understand that the theory of the case here by the Democrats and those who want to defeat the British, who want to defeat the Trump revolution, is that you can silo people into all of these various cyber games which they're playing. Religious war, Q, all of these other things which make people passive. And if we're going to win, it requires an educated population. And we are very passionate about providing you with the education and the ideas which our current educational system has completely deprived people of. So again, get active, sign up for the newsletter, and actually follow us on all the various platforms, and allow us to expand so we can do a whole hell of a lot more of this. So that's what I have to say to wrap it up.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Last thing, thank you, Bill. Corgi Mugshot Fund. All right. I'm going to try, Barbara, we're going to try and work together and get a good picture of your Corgi, because I think people would really love that. Okay, thank you very much, Bill. I also, if you're interested in getting a shirt or the mug that Susan has, we have a merch store. I just tagged this shirt. YouTube probably has a link for our merch in the app, so make sure you check out our merch store, and join us next Thursday at 11 a.m. We'd love for you all to join us again. So thank you very much, everyone. See you next week.